be talking about present levels. And can everyone hear me okay? Okay, at any time I get quiet, or you don't understand, please feel free to raise your hand, ask a question. This is definitely a presentation where we can ask questions throughout. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about present levels and really how do we move beyond this requirement, because most of us who've seen an IEP, we know that they have to be in there. Okay, but how do we move from there to make it actually a meaningful component? Because we want to really think about how can this be important to our work and how can it be useful. Before I go, so I'm Jessica McWeston. I am a doctoral student in my last year at UW-Madison. And prior to this, I was a special ed general ed teacher, literacy specialist, interventionist, all within mostly at Title I schools in New Mexico. And so I worked with a lot of diverse populations, a lot of language needs, students with very significant disabilities, students with learning disabilities, just a wide array of experiences. And so my current interests now focus on literacy instruction, inclusive practices, and kind of some of those barriers that hinder it. So present levels in the IEP is really something that is a barrier a lot of times to inclusive education. So, how many of you guys have heard of this CCR, College and Career Ready IEPs? Okay, so there's this 5-step process on how we can make our IEPs college and career ready. Okay, so I don't need to spend time to read over every single one, but I want us to just take a second and think about it. Okay, so as we're talking about this, as we're thinking about present levels, does this fit in with the this 5-step process that there is? Who has an idea of maybe one that it might hit on? You can just shout it out. The first one, absolutely. So the first one says, understanding achievement of grade level academic standards and functional expectations in order to identify the student's strengths and needs. That sounds about right. Okay. Is there any others? If you don't want to say it, just hold up your fingers. Okay, number 2. Okay, number 2 says identify how the student's disability affects academic achievement and functional performance. Definitely sounds like that one would fit as well. Okay, so we'll kind of be thinking about that and how this really ties in throughout the presentation. Okay, so here's where you need the handout. Okay, so you're going to be taking some notes on the handout. If you didn't grab them, they're on the second table on both sides. Okay, so I'm going to give you about 1 minute. Okay, and you'll see them on the. So you'll see on this sheet, there's this top box. It says warm up 1. So right now we're talking about warm up 1. Okay, so in the warm up 1 box, I want you to just take about 1 minute, and I want you to describe a child without a disability. Okay? Keyword, without, so no disability. I want you to think and describe them academically, socially, anyway, in that box. Okay, so take a minute, write it down. If you also want to come grab some candy, you can do that too. You don't need to take it all back. Students have plenty already. I'm going to give you about 20 more seconds or so. Okay. So, you're still ready, that's okay. Just have to be perfect. Okay. Now, warm up number 2. Okay, so you're gonna switch over to the next box. Warm up number 2. I want you to write their present levels, okay, for a student with a disability. Okay? So again, you're gonna have about 1 minute. Take some time, fill out warm up activity number 2. Okay, so present levels for a student with a disability. It could be a student that you work with. It could be just in general, like, you know, a kid you imagine. It could be a student that you know, but you know, your child. It's really open. About 20 more seconds. All right, so start wrapping up. Okay. So now I want you to think about what you wrote in warm-up number 1 and what you wrote in warm-up number 2. Are there any differences? Is there some overlap? Is there some similarities? I want you to think about that for a second and talk to a partner, someone around you, for just about like 30 seconds or so.
You can always use me, I'm just a camera guy.
Okay.
If you want someone to talk to, just...
I wrote about my 2 grandchildren. My first grandchild, he's 17. He's been with me since he was 3. Well, since he was newborn, he started. Both of them go to the Montessori school. And he's bright, outgoing. He's a fun joker. He understands. He's questioning all the time. And he manages money because he's working at the gate. He's 17. My 9-year-old granddaughter, she's friendly. She gets mad easily. She acts out. She's stand a child. She always tries to, you know, if I say something, she's always got to answer
But I'm going to go ahead and pause
or
us
she's
for a
always
second.
picking
And
around
I'm going to ask for maybe 3 or 4 volunteers. So 3 or 4 groups to kind of share out maybe a finding that they had.
because she's,
Okay?
learning disability.
So go ahead and wrap up your conversation. And is there a group that would like to share out?
But she's reading kindergarten.
So we're going to take about 3 or 4 groups to volunteer and just share out maybe something that they noticed between this exercise.
Lesson and then, of course, when you have down, teacher puts you in the class.
Everyone find that they were exactly the same?
And both of
So
them stay.
I wrote it thinking of just like the same pretend person.
Okay.
Had they had the same struggles but without an IEP versus having the same struggles with an IEP.
Okay.
And just that natural deficit-based language. In the warm-up 1, like this would be the same hypothetical student. I wrote, student is a strong reader, struggles with math, homework completion, but often off task on cell phone, responds respectfully to teacher redirection.
Okay.
And then, had there been an IEP, I wrote, student performs at grade level in reading, but below grade level in math, you know, without the data. Saying lack of homework completion could impede progress. Often, off-task behaviors require teacher redirection.
Okay.
It's the same,
It's the same student,
but it's
different
definitely
language.
different.
Yeah, this deficit language. How many of you guys also saw this like negative or deficit language when you're describing kids with a disability? More challenges. Okay? That's something that we often see. Does anyone else have any like key finding that they've noticed? As one easier than the other? They both just about the same. Okay. So we noticed some different things about present levels, but I'm going to ask you, I know, I'm asking you to write a lot, but don't worry, I'll stop for this for a little bit, okay? So I want you to take 1 minute, and I want you to just really think about what you know about present levels, okay? So that could be, what do they need to include? Why do we need them? What they should talk about, who needs them, kind of anything that you know about present levels, okay? About 10 more seconds to kind of wrap up your thoughts. Okay, we're just going to take just a few volunteers to just share out like a brief phrase or just like a concept or an idea. Okay, does anyone want to share one thing that maybe they know about present levels? what you think you know?
Well, I'm not a teacher, I'm a parent, but we go through the IEP process. I wrote current level of competency, proficiency, or skill compared to the age or grade level expectation.
Okay, great.
It has to discuss the deficits because it has to be tied to a goal.
Okay. What else?
Has to just have strengths of the student and a good description of the student.
Okay, so strength descriptions.
Data-driven, connecting the effect of the disability to the disability-related needs and goals, and then supports needed to meet those.
Okay. All right, so we're going to kind of unpack all of these. And at the end, we'll have time to reflect on what your learning is and go back. Okay, so I'm part of this research team, and we actually have close to 90 IEPs from students from K through 12, or 12th grade, and we're analyzing what's in the present levels. And so it's been really fascinating to kind of see what's in there, and really from an outside perspective, because we're obviously not employees of the school district, and so we have permission to have these de-identified IEPs, and it's been fascinating to kind of see what's in there. So hopefully we can use some of this information to kind of guide and get some great information out to teachers, parents, and everyone else. So what are we finding? And some of you guys have already hit on this. Often present levels are full of negative language. The student can't do this. They cannot read at grade level. And it's just constant. They can't do what they're not able to do. Okay, so what students can do. How different they are. They are 7 grade levels behind their peers. And that's just all that's written in there constantly. As a family member, how do you think that would make you feel? I mean, I can say I would feel like, wow, my kid is very different. And as a parent, you probably know that, and you don't need to be told that 19 times. Okay, a lot of times there's this circular reasoning. So Johnny has Down syndrome, so he can't perform at his grade level. Well, he can't perform at his grade level because he has Down syndrome. And we'll see that in present levels, this like circular reasoning. Sometimes they're too narrow. So think about like math, an entire math present level, and it's all just talking about points. That's pretty hyper-focused. I don't know anything else they're doing in math. Are they talking about addition? Are they talking about multiplication? What about word problems? What about anything else? If it's just focused on this one skill of identifying points, and it's an entire paragraph, that's pretty focused. We also can kind of see the opposite, that it's too broad. And I'll share some examples with you of present levels throughout. This is actually one that we've seen, and I kid you not when I say we're pulling these from IEPs, is it'll say performs at a kinder level. And that's the entire present level. As a teacher, what information does that give you?
Nothing.
Nothing. I mean, I have no idea how to help that student. If that student moved tomorrow and that new teacher picks up that IEP, do they have any idea about that kid? None at all. And then this one really breaks my heart, honestly. It simply lists assessment results. So it'll say, according to this test, and the Woodcock-Johnson, and this speech test, and that. And that's it. There's no talk, just test scores.
That's not right.
Yeah, it really isn't. Okay? And really the overall consensus is we're finding that there's a lot of not meaningful information. So, we want it to be meaningful. Okay? So, we'll circle back to this. Present levels are the foundation of the IEP. Okay? So just think about that for a second. They're the foundation of the IEP. If we start with something, think about if we're building a house. If we start with a foundation that's kind of rocky, there's like holes and gaps, is that house gonna stay? Probably not. It's not gonna stick around for very long. Okay, so when we're building an IEP, we need a really strong foundation. That's going to set us up to support that student and for the student to make growth. Okay, so having a really strong foundation or having good present levels, it allows us to develop appropriate goals. It allows us to really think about what services does the student need? What do they need to be exited from? Maybe they don't need a service anymore. What supports do they need? What accommodations are working? This is kind of that chance to say like, wow, we've been doing this accommodation, and is it even working? Really talking about that. And really, it allows us to think about, later on, the placement decision for the child. So, I know it's important, special ed, laws, everything else, we know that this is important. I always think it's important, though, to really go back and look at the law and say, what does it say? Okay, so this is where in IDA it talks about present levels. I think it's really important, these parts. Oops. Okay, present levels have to include the IEP has to include present levels, which are the child's present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. Okay, it has to include both. It also has to include how the disability affects the child's involvement and progress in the general ed curriculum. And then the last part, we'll talk a little bit about too, but it's mainly for students with more significant disabilities. So these are students who you might think of, they're taking the alternate assessment, or if they're younger than that, then maybe students you think might be taking an alternate assessment. Okay, so we talked about what we should include present levels, but what should we include? Okay, so present levels should include the academic performance. And each of these I'm going to break down in just a minute, okay? It should talk about their functional performance. Okay, child's involvement in the general education curriculum and activities. disability-related needs. And that's a term that you'll hear over and over in DPI's language. Is there a disability-related need? Short-term benchmarks or objectives. Again, this is that addressing the two lower parts of IDEA, where it is talking about if students are taking the alternate assessment. And it also should be detailed and specific to the child. Okay? So now we're going to break down each of those. So we'll talk about the area. I'll give you some non-examples and then some examples. Okay? So, academic performance. All subject areas. How many of you guys have seen IEPs where it just says reading and math? Are there any other subject areas in these schools? There's a lot. Okay? Now, there's a caveat to that. A disability has to impact it. So, if the student has a math learning disability, that may or may not impact them in social studies. That may or may not impact them in art. Okay? If the disability impacts that subject area, it should be included. Okay? So if a student has a learning disability in reading or an intellectual disability that impacts their entire school day, then it really should have all subject areas. It should mention specific strategies and interventions. It should include some formal assessments. It should also explain those scores from the assessments. That's really key. And then as well as that progress monitoring. So you have these formal assessments, but also what are you seeing in the classroom? When you're taking data on this kiddo, what are you seeing? How are they performing day to day? Okay, so now let's look at some non-examples. Okay, in social studies, and XXX is the student's name, so just so you know, you'll see that pop up quite a bit. In social studies, XXX can usually tell me the points of a reading. He likes social studies. So, who knows how to help this kid in social studies? Yeah, I don't either. So-and-so scores in the 1 percentile on the MAP test in both reading and writing. And just an FYI, that was the entire credit level. That was it, just one sentence. So what is a MAP test? I mean, personally, I know what a MAP test is, but does everyone at the table know what a MAP test is? Do they know what it means? It's like 1 percentile. Well, what does that mean? What does the scores mean? What are they assessing? How is it done? What skills do they need to work on? Because if you're telling me a 1 percentile in math and reading and writing, well, what do they need to work on? I have no clue. So-and-so successfully completed 50% of the items on the cognitive domain of the APS level 1. I actually had to look up what the APS was. I'll be honest, I didn't know what it was. Again, I don't know what that means. Okay, so now, before you get scared, I know this is a lot of text. Don't worry, I'll read it in just a second. So, you'll notice that, one, there's a lot more information, okay? But it's very detailed, and it actually will help you know how to work with this kid. So I'm going to read it because I know the text gets small, especially if you're in the back. So according to and I took out the district's name, so it's XYZ. According to the XYZ district reading assessment, so-and-so's reading decoding skills are 4 years below her grade level, 8th grade. Her comprehension skills are 2 to 3 years below grade level, variation due to familiarity with the content and whether she read aloud or alone. And her listening comprehension skills are at grade level. In the past year, her reading level has increased an entire grade level in all areas. She met her previous goal of reading a text and answering who, what, and where comprehension questions with 85% accuracy. During reading instruction, So-and-so often struggles with reading the whole word and instead uses the initial letter or blend to guess the word without looking at the full word. Her decoding mistakes impact the meaning of the sentence, and she is able to catch her mistake in 2 out of 10 miscues. Sorry, lost my spot there. When prompted verbally to stop, go back and try again, chunk the word. Do we know that specific strategy that they're using? Yeah, if I was working with that kid, I'd know the exact phrase to use to cue them. Immediately after incorrectly reading the word, she is able to correct her decoding mistakes 94% of the time using a level 40, 4th grade level text. So it keeps going, so I'm not going to read all the words, but if you had this kid that transferred into your classroom, would you know how to work with them on day 1?
Yep.
You'd know where to start, you'd know some specific strategies, you'd know how, like what kind, and it goes on later to say what type of questions, and then at the end it even talks about strategies that are used in the inclusive classroom on how to access the grade level text. So, does this take a little bit more work? It does, we gotta be honest. But does it set a good foundation of knowing where to start for reading goals, supports that she needs in the classroom? So later on when you're thinking about all of this, you have a lot of it there already, okay? All right, so now we're gonna jump to functional performance. So we need to be thinking about related services. So OT, PT, speech, I could keep going on and on and on. Communication, and often that's separate than speech because speech may be just a service where they're working, like in a pull-out or in a push-in, but what is communication throughout the day? And for a lot of our students, especially with more significant disabilities, we need to be thinking about both. How are they communicating throughout the entire school day? It also may include, again, if this is a disability-related need, it might include what is their attention like, what is their organization, social skills, behavior, independent living, self-advocacy, vocation, or vocational and employment skills. Okay? Now, does every kid need every single one of those? No. Okay? But let's look at some non-examples. So-and-so successfully completed 28% of the items on the social domain of the AEPS level 1, and it goes on. Okay? Again, no clue what that means. I don't know what was assessed. Again, I had to research what the AEPS was. So-and-so's ability to use both hands together is emerging. He has made gains in this area, but he continues to require assistance to complete these activities. His hand strength and ability to cross midline is also emerging at this time. It's a little bit closer, but what is ability to use both hands together? What does that mean? It's emerging. So has it been emerging for a few years? Is it meaning like being able to do this? Or does it mean he's able to like pick up an item? So we want to be a little bit more specific. Okay, again, this is one area of functional skills. So if you have a kiddo who needs a lot of needs, you might have a really long functional skills present levels. Okay, so-and-so requires adult support to interpret his wants, needs, and ideas across multiple and varied contexts in an academic setting. His functional communication is emergent, and he has been observed to make choices during lunch and work time. During lunch, he has been observed to communicate a choice between food items by turning his head toward the desired item in 4 out of 5 days over the last 3 weeks. During work time, he makes choices by reaching or sometimes pushing the item towards the adult. He has been observed to protest by closing his eyes and or crying. During structured communication routines with this SLP, He has demonstrated independent accuracy ranging from 88 to 100% in 3 out of 4 data collection days when requesting an item from a 2-item array of representational tactile objects. He most consistently uses the representational objects book, fork, and cup to communicate requests or structured routines. So that's going to give you a little bit more information. So I know what areas that he's working on. I know that he's beginning to make choices. And it seems like he's doing that with food kind of 80% of the time, at least over the last 3 weeks. Is this perfect? No. But again, it gives us a lot more information than 28% of the items on the social domain. Okay? All right. This one is one of the harder ones, I think. Involvement in the general ed curriculum and activities. So this should address how the child is involved in and working on the general ed curriculum. So think about those grade level standards, okay? How are they accessing that? Here's a big one. It's bolded. Supports needed to engage in the general ed curriculum. So not only how are they doing it, but specifically what supports do they need. This is not simply, we're using this curriculum. Okay? So we'll see in some of the non-examples, but we just want to make sure that it's not just, we use X, Y, Z curriculum. So, a non-example. So-and-so is currently enrolled in the autism classroom with functional curriculum and is learning skills to help him be successful in daily life. Did it even mention general ed curriculum?
No.
A lot of times, and I even think back to like when I was a teacher and, you know, day to day and working with tons of different students is we'd get tons of IEPs and would say, they have autism and they're in this classroom. Again, it's like kind of that circular thing. Well, they have autism, so they should be in this classroom. Well, they're in this classroom, so they can't get general ed curriculum. But they have to be there because they have autism. Which, who says? But, anyways. So-and-so has an intellectual disability and is in the life skills class. He uses the unique curriculum. Okay. Now this one sometimes can be embedded throughout several of them, so it doesn't necessarily have to be a separate entity. So this one is about reading, and if you recall back to the student action that we talked about, the first one, academic, this was at the end. So when so-and-so is reading a text in any of her subject core inclusion classes, she reads an adapted version of the text, which is written at a 5th grade reading level. Her classes use partner reading, whole group reading, and as a last resort, reading with a paraprofessional or teacher for all textbook reading. Do I know what specific strategies are being used in her classes?
Yeah.
I know what accommodations they're doing. So all of her teachers use partner reading or whole group reading in the classroom. And as a last resort, read with an adult. She requires modified tests and assignments, including modification to the reading level, using a field of 3 in all answers, and extended time for writing, less than 3 sentences per response, no more than 2 open-ended responses per assignment. And I cut off some more. Do I know how she's getting access to the general ed curriculum?
Yep.
I know pretty well how she is, and I know what supports that she needs to access it. Okay, disability-related needs. So it's going to address the impact that the disability has on their academic and functional performance. It is any need due to the disability. Now, just to note, this is not an LRE justification, an LRE meaning the least restrictive environment. So this is not where we're deciding where they're going to receive their education. This is simply saying, how does their disability impact their day? Not where they are, but how does it impact them? Okay? So, how is it impacting their academic achievement and functional performance? Some non-examples. So has significant speech and language delays and autism. He needs an IEP. I would assume so if that's why we're here. So, again, not a great example of how that impacts him and why he needs an IEP. I mean, they say he does, but no clue. So-and-so has a diagnosis of spastic quadriplegic cerebral palsy. As a result of this, he has abnormal muscle tone and severe developmental delays in physical abilities. Does that impact his classroom performance? I don't really know. So let's look at an example. So, taking that same one, this one I actually wrote part of it, is that diagnosis still of cerebral palsy. He is non-ambulatory, my goodness, and requires total assistance for transfers and most activities of daily living. He is severely delayed in gross motor abilities as compared to same age peers and requires modification to participate in his educational curricula. He requires full support for verbal, visual, and/or light physical prompting to participate in physical activities, movements, and across the entire school day. Do I know why he has an IEP now? I do. He needs a lot of support. So again, I took the other one. Maybe I should have put the other one on top. Sorry, didn't think about that. He's reluctant to talk due to anxiety about his skills. He needs adult support, prompts, and models to speak consistently, and special education services to address his academic and functional skills. So-and-so requires consistent positive support and validation to increase his comfort level when speaking and redirection or cueing to listen in large group situations and at times small groups. Okay, so I know that he needs a lot of support, and I probably could have tweaked that last one a little bit to be an even better example, but not perfect, sorry. Okay, so you'll notice there's a star here. This is if the child is taking an alternate assessment, okay? If they're younger than that, if you think that they're going to be taking an alternate assessment. So within the present levels, this isn't a separate section again, kind of embedded throughout, discuss the benchmarks or objectives that the child has been working on throughout the last year. So if a student is taking an alternate assessment, they need to have short-term objectives and benchmarks. So, just talking about how they met those throughout the last year. So-and-so has Down syndrome. On his U.S. reading level assessment, level A and level E earned mastery range. I don't know what a U.S. reading level is assessment. I thought it was unique, but it's not. I don't even know on this one, honestly. So just a note, this is a student with a very significant disability at the high school level, and this was the entirety of his academic present levels. So that's it. So, what's an example? So-and-so's reading skills are delayed compared to his peers. His ability to recognize high-frequency words is limited. Peers are reading 200 plus kindergarten to second grade high-frequency words, and so-and-so is reading around 60. Over the last 6 months, so-and-so has addressed his previous IEP benchmarks about letter names, sounds, and decoding VC or vowel consonant and CVC, consonant vowel consonant words. He now knows the names and sounds of 24 out of 26 upper and lowercase letters consistently and in isolation. But when these letters and sounds are put together into words, he has a very hard time decoding these sounds. So, it's pretty good. Here's where it becomes really good. You'll note it's hard to see, but on this side, this assessment, the quick Phonics Trainer, is from January 2017. This one, September 2016. So I can see what progress they made. So they were given the same assessment, and I can see in September, they got 20 out of 26 for letter names, and in January, 26 out of 26. Letter sounds 17, and in January, 24. So I can compare that and see how are they making that progress, because that was the areas that they were working on over the last year. So, we also want to make it detailed and specific to the child, okay? We want to provide some context. This one, I hope it goes without saying, should not be a template or copy and pasted on multiple IEPs. What does the first letter in IEP stand for?
Individual.
Individualized. So if we're copy and pasting on every kid's IEP in your class, it's a little concerning.
Lazy.
It is lazy, and honestly, it's a huge disservice to the kids. I mean, you can have an idea of like, I always include this assessment and other things, but to have like, you know, really like a copy and pasted is concerning. It really needs to discuss the student's needs. So this is kind of like thinking about like, what are some deficits that they have? What are some things that they struggle with that you're still working on? It should be measurable. Okay, so you should have some data, not just generic. So sometimes we'll see IEPs or present levels and they'll say, like, he's able to sometimes do this task. Well, what is sometimes? Is that 40% of the time? Is that 90% of the time? Because that's a huge difference. If it's an important task and it's 40%, I might say, wow, we need to target that skill. If it's 90%, maybe not. Maybe let's focus on something else. There should be some positive language there. Okay? We know that we have to address some areas that they are below grade level and that they need assistance in. But, on the same token, do we need every sentence to say they can't do this, they're below grade level, they're unable to do this alone, they need help on everything? A little bit depressing to read. I'm sure there's some way that we can frame some of that in a positive light. And then the most important, it allows them to pick up the IEP and know how to work with that child. And they know how to know what their current academic and functional performance skills or levels are. So if the kid moves tomorrow unexpectedly, that teacher will know how to work with them. If you, for some reason, don't come back to work on a Tuesday, I don't know, you just don't come back. They're going to know how to work with that child, okay? Life can happen sometimes. Okay, non-examples. So-and-so has autism and is in the functional skills class. He performs significantly below grade level in math and reading. Again, I don't know what this means. Okay. So-and-so participates in large group instruction with gestures, reaches, pushes away, pushes and turns head away or towards an activity, and vocalizes to communicate his desire and feelings. He also uses facial expressions and eye gazes, to express his interest in activities. He has shown improvement with activating a direct selection signal button voice output device, Big Mac, to choose or continue an activity. So I could keep going and reading it all, but does this give you a little bit more information?
Much so.
Yeah. I know exactly what device he's using too. So again, if I get this kid on day 1 of a school year, they just show up at my school, and they have an IEP, do I know what device this kid is used to? Absolutely. It's a little bit better than just saying he's below grade level in math and reading. Okay. Perfect. So, I want to say, circle back to this. It's like an idea that present levels are the foundation of the IEP. Okay? So, think back to all of these different areas that we've talked about. If we are building these present levels, they're detailed. They're addressing all the areas of academic need. They're functional performance. There's data. It's talking about what's working, what's not working. There's data right there, and it's explained. Are we